Hello and welcome to the first episode of a series on tutorials for X4 Foundations, version 7.60. I'm going to keep these episodes pretty short. I'm going to do them basically by topic, mainly because I don't want to be recording enormously long videos, and also because I'm not really familiar with how to set up chapters in YouTube. So we're just going to do short episodes based on each thing I want to cover. And I hope you follow along. If you have not played before, this is a fantastic 4X style game that is also a space cockpit combat game. And it is, without exaggeration, my favorite game of all time. So hope you will enjoy this tutorial and hope it's useful. If you have any questions or comments, please do put them in the comments below so that I can respond or correct things if I clearly get something wrong and you notice. Let me know. So first thing we're going to do in this episode is look at the settings. I'm running this bog standard vanilla with no mods so that the tutorial will show exactly what you will see if you haven't installed any mods. But I do recommend mods once you get familiar with the game because the mod scene in X4 is really, really good, both in Steam Workshop and especially on Nexus mods. The stuff there is fantastic. So here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look first here at the, notice how all of my mods are turned off. We're going to look at what the expansions are. And this is essentially the order in which they were released. First is Split Vendetta, then Cradle of Humanity, Tides of Avarice, Kingdom End, Timelines, and then the Hyperion Pack. Split Vendetta brings the Split faction to the game. Cradle of Humanity brings the Terrans. Tides of Avarice brings piracy factions, kind of an interesting hodgepodge of things there. Kingdom End brings the Boron finally to the game. Timelines adds a campaign mode after a fashion. We'll go over that in another episode. And the Hyperion Pack is sort of a storyline DLC that brings you a new ship and has a little bit of a story about the Paranid, which is another one of those factions. All right, so going back up here, and we're going to look at the settings. So first thing to note here is the display settings, of course. I'm running at 1440 resolution. And we're going to go over what the best way to set this up will be, but most of it's not going to be on this screen. It's going to be on the next one. Okay, so the game does use options for DLSS. I have it turned on, and you can set your resolution and so on. It is handy if you have a graphics card that isn't super powerful. It's not as important as it might be in some other games, for reasons I'll explain shortly. So here we go, graphics settings. I currently have it set to a custom, but the main thing to be looking at here, honestly, I think is volumetric fog. I'll talk about the others here in a little bit, but the main one is volumetric fog. When volumetric fog is on in any form, there's options for low, medium, and high, and off. It will impact your frame rate rather tremendously unless you have a really good GPU. You may be able to see in the lower right-hand corner right now, my FPS is about 62, and that's just in the main menu. And if I put volumetric fog on while I'm running the game, it will drop me down. If I have it on, say, high, I'll be getting no more than 20 to 30 FPS throughout the game. If I leave it off, I can typically stay between 50 to 60. But for reasons, again, that I will explain in a minute, frame rate in this game is not really fully dependent on the graphics card. So texture quality, shadows and soft shadows, the usual thing. Screen space ambient occlusion, or realistic shadows of corners and crevices, it says. Glow quality, UI glow quality, I recommend keeping this on high because the glow that happens, you may even be able to see it right here on the edge. It's like this little dotted, pointillist, speckled kind of glow. And if I lower this down, the speckling becomes a lot more noticeable. So I generally recommend you either keep it at off or high and don't mess around with the ones in the middle. It doesn't really affect your frame rate too much. It's more of an aesthetic thing. And then you got, of course, glow intensity. Chromatic aberration affects the edges of the screen and kind of adds a little bit of visual flair. It's not super handy. It doesn't really do anything too significant. And then distortion for heat and things like that. Doesn't really, again, happen too much in this game. It's not something that really comes up. Parallax occlusion mapping. Here's another big one. The level of detail setting. Obviously, if you set it up real high, then things that are farther away, it'll be forced to show you the geometry of those things farther out, which does reduce frame rate to a degree. Same thing with the effect distance. Laser blasts and things like that, how far away they'll show. Radar, there's an option for off, low, and high. I don't know that there's really any reason to keep it on low unless you're struggling with your GPU. And I don't think it's a good idea to have it turned off. Screen space reflections, that's just for reflections on metal surfaces. Again, aesthetically cool, but it tends to hit your frame rate, especially if you're walking around on a station. So I generally leave mine low. I could even turn it off and I probably wouldn't notice too much. Reflection probes, environment reflections. This kind of has a similar aesthetic quality to the screen space reflections, but it doesn't have as much of an impact on frame rates. So you can leave it on high and it probably won't do too much. Okay, cockpit glass reflections. You'll see in your cockpit that there'll be, glass reflections if you have it turned up. Okay, high quality video capture, that's really for people who are doing video like me, except I don't really know what the advantages of turning that off. So I don't really know what that's ultimately for. Moving on, we have sound settings. This is very bog standard stuff, just how loud everything is, right? So move on from there. Then to the game settings. Oh, but I want to address the one thing about the frame rates, first of all, before we get into the game settings, which is a big deal. This game is highly CPU limited. And because of the way the simulation works, you're really only going to be operating on one main thread. So hyper-threading, multi-threading is not advantageous in this game. There's a lot of complicated conversations going on online about X4 and whether or not it could be done more efficiently with more threads and so on. Technical stuff slightly above my head, but basically what I think it comes down to is that this game is a simulation of three-dimensional space across a vast area where every single object in the game has to be tracked at the same time for interactions with one another. And in places where you are close by that you could see, which is what the game devs call high attention, you actually have to, the game has to know exactly where everything is oriented, how close everything is to everything else, and what its trajectories are, and so on. So there's a lot of processing in the game that cannot be done in parallel because everything is interacting with everything else, so it has to be handled sequentially in order for things not to get all wonky and screwy. So, CPU limited game. GPU is nice, but honestly, you're going to see more of a hit in your frame rate if your CPU is not up to snuff, and over time throughout the length of your game, as there are more entities in the game and things get more and more gnarly and more complicated. So over time, the frame rate will drop. There's just nothing that can be done about that. But for many hours, if you have a decent enough CPU, you'll get good frame rate in most places. Sometimes you'll run into problems at stations or in some sectors. Second Contact Flashpoint 2, for example, is just the graveyard of CPUs. For some reason, the frame rate in that sector always drops. Don't know why, but it does. Anyway, so you just kind of have to get used to it and accept that it's going to be a thing that you will notice. And if you're the sort of player who gets super frustrated about that sort of thing, maybe X4 is not the game for you. Okay, let's go on to the game settings. There's a few things here that will only make a little bit more sense once we've actually gotten into the game, but I will go over them anyway. Autosave, of course, yeah, you can turn it on or off and have an autosave interval. So basically, sometime between 40 and 80 minutes of a game session, it'll autosave, or you can change it. It used to matter a lot more because the save and load process in this game used to be ridiculously slow, but it has gotten much, much better. And so turning autosave off is not as much of a value added as it used to be. Emergency eject if possible. So basically, if your ship blows up, the game will eject you from your cockpit into your little spacesuit, and you can continue playing. If you have it turned off, then you just straight up die. Okay, ship behavior, you can turn on or off the auto roll. So when you're in the cockpit and you're rolling around in your ship, not inside your ship, when your ship is rolling around, if you stop rolling, then turning on auto roll will make it so that your ship will match the plane of the game, and you'll just kind of right yourself like you're a boat in the ocean. Collision avoidance, you can turn that on or off. If it's turned on, I don't know why it's turned off. I usually I thought I had it on. I guess I did not. The game will attempt, the autopilot and various other mechanisms in the game will attempt to avoid running into things. If you turn it off, things will, your AI, your autopilot will still try really hard not to hit stuff, but it won't care quite as much. And so you'll still bump into things like asteroids, which is not as really a bad thing. You'll mostly just bounce off of them. Boost toggle. There is a boost option in the cockpit where it gives you essentially an afterburner. You can either have it set to, you have to hold down a button to keep it going, or you tap a button to start it and tap a button to turn it off. My recommendation is to leave it off unless you're playing fully on keyboard, in which case might be worth it if you have your boost set to a key that you don't have your hand near most of the time. Aim assist on or off, it's what it sounds like. It helps you aim. Basically, what it means is that your weapons that you fire manually are slightly gimbaled so that they will target a ship roughly within the front section of what you're looking at. Whereas if the aim assist is turned off, it won't. You can also set it to with controller so that when you're playing with a controller which has a lower granularity of control, it will do it will do aim assist for you. But then if you have switched to mouse control or you have stick and throttle, it will not do that. I like to have aim assist on simply because I don't like having to be super precise. This is the future. I mean, already in 2025, there are weapon systems out there that can aim well enough on their own. They don't need human interaction for that. So it just seems silly that you wouldn't have aiming in the future like that. Anyway, maintain speed in menus. You can turn this on or off. What this basically means is that if you're in the map or you open up a menu that doesn't naturally pause the game, if it's turned on, then your ship, if it's in motion, will continue to stay in motion. If you have it turned off, if you open the map or open up a menu that doesn't pause the game, because there are some menus that do pause the game. If you open up a menu that doesn't pause the game or you open up the map, you will immediately slow down and stop. I like to keep it on just because you end up in the menus and the map a lot, and it's a little bit annoying to constantly be coming back out and discovering that you've not gotten anywhere. Turning on subtitles, spoken target names. So that would be essentially when you select a target, the computer voice will tell you what it is. Input feedback can be off, text only, voice only, text and voice. I'm not 100% sure what that is. That I think is a new one. But basically, I believe it is telling you things like you've turned on mouse steering or you've turned off light assist and so on, and it'll flash it on the screen if it's text only, and I believe if it's voice or voice and text, it'll tell you that as well. You can toggle mouse look on or off, and essentially that means that you'll be using the mouse to look around in your cockpit. Rumble intensity, if you've got a controller. Showing tooltips, I do recommend leaving that on. It is a little bit vaguely anti-immersive in some spots, but not really. Mostly it's useful if you're in menus that have complicated stuff that you can do that you're not super familiar with, but especially if you've got the equipment and weapons tooltip mod installed, you have this turned on, and then when you're looking at weapons in the game, you're looking to build a ship, for example, it'll do comparisons and give you details about those weapons. But you have to have the tooltips turned on, and you have to have that mod installed for that to work. Radar display. So you've got options for no radar display at all. I guess some people just like to fly commando. Separate panel or integrated. So we'll see this in another episode, but the separate panel radar is going to be right in the center of your cockpit here, center bottom. And it's all by itself, and it's kind of floating, just kind of floating in space there. It's not really designed in such a way that it looks like it fits with the cockpit, or with the physical elements of the cockpit, versus integrated, where it'll be on the right side HUD panel, overlaying on top of any targeting information that you have, any target details that you have. So it's up to you how you want it to look. I prefer a separate panel just so that I have the radar always there, because the problem with having it integrated is that if for whatever reason that HUD screen goes away, which is to say when you aren't targeting something, the radar also goes away. So that's not super handy. Next up is the UI scale, which is basically just the scale of the interface here. And then what kind of scaling is going to happen for the HUD. You can do none, HUD monitors, and radar. So your UI scaling will determine the HUD scaling, and you can decide to lock off certain elements of that scaling. Menu width scale for experts. Basically, it adjusts the width of menus relative to the screen width, useful for multi-monitor setups. Very few people are needing that, I think, but it is an option. Ooh, I think I can go up here and look at that. No, it doesn't want to tell me. I was hoping it would tell me what input feedback was, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. It's things like telling you flight assist is off, or mouse control for aiming, or what have you. Okay. Show control mode messages. No reason to have that turned on. It really is for experts. That is essentially, I think, that might actually be the same thing as the input feedback now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, I've always left it off. I don't know really what that's for. Re-enable all confirmations. So what this does is confirming things like when you're entering the spacesuit, it says here, there's certain things that it will say, hey, just so you know, and it gives you a little warning or what have you, and you can have it reset those. No confirmations are disabled, or well, basically, if you hit enable, it'll turn them all back on. The ones that you've already canceled out of or had told it to not show again will now show again. And I just played myself a little bit there. That's okay. That's okay. Then you've got proximity alerts for enemies and target lock alerts for enemies, and you can just pick a sound. So if an enemy comes within range, you can pick the sound that you want it to be. And if an enemy has targeted you, you can pick what sound you want it to be. There we go. Nope. And then start menu background scene would be, well, this one is the default. It's basically the default is whichever is the most recent DLC you have installed is what kind of defines what's showing there. In this case, I believe it's a timelines one because I don't think Hyperion has one. Yeah, but you could have it be any of these other ones if you want. It's about to be. Oh, I guess it's gotta reload. There we go. Yeah, that's the original one from the base game. Ah, this music. Love this music. Then you can have a velocity indicator on or off, And that's a little pip on the screen that will show you your direction of travel. We'll get to that when we look at the cockpit. Then we've got head movement intensity. I believe this is associated with things like Toby or head tracking equipment, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And the VE goggles auto reset, honestly, don't know what that is. Okay. Accessibility settings, here we go. Signal leak indicators, long-range scan indicators. Basically just making these elements of the game a little bit easier to see, easier to identify. Light source brightness, game speed. So there is a way, there's a toggle that you can do to basically go into slow-mo, and you can identify what rate of slow-mo you want. So if you need to be playing the game at a slower pace than the regular, then this is how you do it. You toggle that on, and you can set your speed. And then finally, stardust intensity here, how much stardust you're going to see when you're flying through space. We've got some colorblind options here, which allows you to remap the way the colors look in the game to suit a particular colorblind matrix that you might be dealing with. And then we've got some input feedback, which can show various elements of your actions in the game, and it'll tell you when those things are happening. It'll alert you that those things are happening. So, for example, if you're going into full forward or full reverse and so on, you can have it identify for you that it's occurring. So, okay. Well, we're going to leave it here. It's a longer episode than I expected, about 22 minutes in so far. Next episode, I'm going to be going over the controls, and that's a long one. There's a lot going on in here, but I'll leave that to the next episode. And then in the third episode, we'll go over the options for what kinds of games you can play, what versions, the timelines versus open universe, and I'll detail those. And then finally, we will actually get into the cockpit and fly around, and I'll show you how all that works. And then we'll be off to the races. Thanks for watching. See you next time.